The wind screamed like a dying animal. At 12,000 feet, the air was thin enough to turn breath into ice crystals. Each exhale a frozen ghost that vanished into the whiteout, consuming the Hindu Kush. Captain Raymond Scuderi pressed himself against the frozen ridge, his ATAC's winter gear doing little against the cold that seemed to reach through fabric and flesh straight to bone. The machine gun fire tearing into the rock above his head sent chips of stone spinning into the blizzard like shrapnel. They were pinned. Completely, utterly pinned. His radio crackled with broken transmissions. Fragments of desperate voices from his scattered Delta team, each operator fighting their own private war against an enemy that had materialized from the storm like demons. The mission had been clean on paper, secure, Dr. Anton Volkov, the Russian bioweapons scientist whose conscience had finally caught up with his research, and extract him before the mercenary kill teams could silence him permanently. But intelligence had missed the backup force, missed the hunter-killer squads with their thermal optics and heavy weapons, missed the fact that someone had paid a fortune to make sure this defection never happened. Now Captain Scuderi had 5 men scattered across a frozen plateau, one terrified scientist somewhere behind the lines, and enemies closing from every compass point. The blizzard that should have been their ally had become a coffin, sealing them in with professionals who knew these mountains as well as he did. Then the shot came. Not the chattering roar of automatic weapons or the whooshing arc of RPGs. This was different. A single heavy crack that cut through the chaos with the authority of a judge's gavel. 2 kilometers down the slope, Scuderi watched through the swirling snow as the enemy technical a modified pickup truck, with a mounted 50 calories that had been chewing up his team's position, shuddered violently. The engine block exploded in a spray of oil and metal. The vehicle lurched sideways, the gunner tumbling from his perch as the whole assembly ground to a smoking halt. Captain Scuderi's world stopped. His head snapped around, eyes scanning the white hell surrounding them, searching for the shooter. Every operator in his team was accounted for, pinned down, heads low, fighting for survival. None of them had line of sight to that target. None of them carried a rifle capable of that kind of precision at that distance. And none of them, not a single one, could have made that shot. Not in 40-knot winds. Not through a blizzard that reduced visibility to arm's length. Not against a moving target obscured by terrain and weather. The mathematics alone required calculations that even the best snipers couldn't perform under fire. In the cold, with frost creeping across their optics and their fingers going numb inside their gloves. "Captain, did you see that?" Sergeant First Class Marcus Cole's voice crackled through the radio, disbelief cutting through the usual professional calm. "That shot came from our 8 o'clock, high elevation. We don't have anyone positioned there." Scuderi felt something cold, colder than the wind, colder than the fear of imminent death settle into his chest. He'd been running special operations for 17 years. He knew every sniper in JSOC, knew their capabilities, their preferred calibers, their maximum effective ranges. He could read a shot the way a detective reads evidence at a crime scene, angle of entry, terminal ballistics, the signature choices that made each marksman unique. This shot had a signature, one he recognized the way a man recognizes his own heartbeat, one he'd thought he'd never see again. "Giles," he whispered, the word forming frost in the air, the name a ghost itself. 3 years ago, Warrant Officer Watson Giles had been the finest long-range marksman Scuderi had ever worked with. They'd called him the Math, partially because he approached every shot like a physics problem, partially because once he calculated your position, the equation always ended the same way: 0. Giles had saved Scuderi's life in Helmand Province, taking out an enemy sniper at 1,800 meters through a dust storm. He'd saved him again in Yemen, holding a rooftop position for 9 hours while the extraction team fought their way through a city that wanted them dead. His rifle had spoken with a voice that was part thunder, part whisper, part prophecy. But the third time, Giles hadn't come home. The operation had gone catastrophic in these same mountains. A blizzard worse than this one had rolled in during a classified extraction. Their team had been compromised, surrounded by a professional force that fought with the precision of former special operations soldiers. Ammunition dwindling, comms going dark. Giles had taken a position on an exposed ridge, a suicide post, to provide covering fire while the team retreated through a killing zone. His last transmission had been 4 words: "Go. I'll hold here." They'd searched for 5 days when the weather cleared. Found a collapsed ridge, blood spray frozen in crimson starbursts across the rocks. Spent 50 caliber casings scattered like offerings. But no body, no weapon, no sign of Giles except the evidence that he'd fought until the mountain itself had swallowed him. MIA, presumed KIA. The designation came down like a coffin lid closing. Scuderi had carried the weight of leaving Watson Giles behind every day since. Had attended the memorial, had seen the empty casket lowered into Arlington soil, had tried to convince himself that there was no other choice, that Giles would have wanted them to complete the mission. The problem was simple and impossible. Only one person could make the shot he'd just witnessed, and that person was supposed to be dead. "Captain, contact front." Cole's urgent shout snapped Scuderi back to the immediate crisis. 3 technicals moving up the eastern approach. "We're about to be overrun." Scuderi raised his rifle, calculating angles and ammunition. They had maybe 2 magazines per man. The enemy had reinforcements, resupply, and the high ground. This was the math that ended with body bags and failure reports. Then another shot cracked through the frozen air. The lead technical on the eastern approach, the one with a mounted PKM machine gun that could have shredded his team like paper, suddenly veered wildly. Its front right tire exploded in a spray of rubber and steel. The vehicle flipped, tumbling down the slope, men spilling from it like dice from a cup. A third shot. The radio antenna on the command vehicle shattered, cutting off the enemy's coordination. A 4th shot. A fuel bladder mounted on one of the pursuing trucks erupted in flames, the explosion briefly turning the blizzard orange, silhouetting the mercenaries as they scattered. Each shot came from a different angle, each one surgical, precise, devastatingly effective. Whoever was out there was repositioning faster than should be possible in terrain that would kill an unprepared operator in hours, moving through conditions that made navigation nearly impossible, finding firing positions, calculating ballistics that would challenge a supercomputer, and then hitting targets that existed only as suggestions in the storm. Scuderi's radio suddenly crackled with a frequency he hadn't heard in 3 years. An old encryption protocol, one that had been retired and buried when its primary user was declared killed in action. The signal was weak, ghostly, but the pattern was unmistakable. 3 short bursts, 2 long, 1 short. A path marker. His hand trembled, and it wasn't from the cold as he pulled out his GPS unit. The signal was painting a route across his screen, a path through the killing ground that avoided the obvious approaches where ambushes waited. It showed safe passages through the rocky terrain, positions with natural cover, elevation advantages. No one could have this intelligence without real-time observation from an elevated, concealed position. No one except a ghost who'd been watching these mountains for years. "Captain, what are your orders?" Cole's voice held a note Scuderi rarely heard from his veteran sergeant. Uncertainty. "We move," Scuderi said, his throat tight with emotions he couldn't name. "Follow the path on your GPS exactly. No deviations, no questions." "Sir, that route," Cole began. "I know what it looks like." Scuderi cut him off. "Follow it anyway. Someone out there is giving us a chance. We'd be fools not to take it." They moved into the storm, following a path laid out by Deadman's guidance, each step taking them deeper into impossible hope. Behind them, another shot rang out, then another, the enemy command structure being systematically dismantled by a marksman who didn't exist, a sniper who'd been declared killed in action 1,000 days ago, a legend who apparently refused to stay buried. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and comment where you're watching from. I will love to say hello to you just to know how far our story is going. The frozen marshland stretched before them like a minefield disguised as salvation. Ice-crusted pools reflected the white sky in fragments, each surface a question mark, solid ground, or a death trap that would swallow a man whole. Captain Scuderi raised his fist, signaling the team to halt at the edge of the tree line. 5 operators and 1 scientist whose hands wouldn't stop shaking even when he clasped them together. "We can't go through there," Dr. Volkov whispered, his Russian accent thickening with fear. "The ice, it will not hold." "It'll hold better than our position here," Scuderi replied, scanning the marsh through his rifle optic. The blizzard had intensified, turning the world into a white void where distance became meaningless and direction was a prayer. Behind them, the sound of engines and shouted commands in a language that wasn't friendly. The mercenaries were regrouping, and they had the numbers to make this a short fight. "Single file," Scuderi ordered. 5-meter intervals. Step exactly where I step. Cole, your rear guard. "Sir, with respect," Sergeant Cole began, his weathered face tight with concern. "We'll be exposed out there. No cover. If they catch us in the open, then we move fast." Scuderi locked eyes with his sergeant. "We're dead if we stay. At least out there, we control how we die." The first step onto the ice was an act of faith. The surface creaked beneath Scuderi's weight, a sound like old bones settling. But it held. He moved forward, testing each section with the butt of his rifle before committing his full weight. Behind him, the team followed in a silent line, each man trusting the path the captain carved through the frozen wilderness. The snow fell in sheets now, visibility dropping to less than 20 yards. They could hear the enemy behind them, voices calling coordinates, the mechanical sound of weapons being readied. Any moment, the mercenaries would reach the tree line and see them exposed in the marsh like targets on a range. Then the shot came, not close, somewhere far behind them, back toward the ridge where the enemy was staging. The crack of the rifle echoed across the marsh, followed immediately by a sound Scuderi recognized, the wet thump of a round finding flesh at distance. No scream, no cry, just the finality of instant death. "Contact," Specialist Andrea Martinez called from the middle of the line, her rifle coming up. "Negative," Scuderi replied, holding up his hand. "That wasn't aimed at us." Another shot. Same caliber, heavy, powerful. The kind of round that could reach out past a mile and deliver devastating energy on target. Somewhere in the tree line behind them, someone was having a very bad day. The shouting intensified, confused, turning from organized pursuit to panicked commands. A third shot. This one Scuderi tracked by sound alone, calculating angle and origin point through instinct, honed by years of combat. High elevation, northwest, maybe 800 meters from the tree line, which meant whoever was shooting was positioned on the slopes above the marsh, shooting down into the pursuit force, shooting with precision that shouldn't be possible in these conditions. 2,000 yards, Cole said quietly, coming up beside Scuderi as they paused on a solid section of ground. Maybe more, through a blizzard, hitting moving targets we can't even see from here. Scuderi watched the tree line through his optic, saw muzzle flashes from the mercenaries as they returned fire blindly into the storm, saw figures diving for cover, their formation breaking apart like water hitting rocks. And then he saw the target drop. The mercenary had been coordinating the pursuit. Scuderi could tell by his position slightly behind the firing line, by the way the others had been oriented toward him. A commander or senior NCO. The man had been using a tree for cover, exposing only his head and one shoulder. Smart tactical discipline that should have kept him safe. The round took him high in the chest, just below the collarbone. Even through the snow and distance, Scuderi saw the way the body fell, not backward from impact, but downward, folding like a marionette with cut strings. The bullet had angled down through the chest cavity, severing the spine, destroying the heart and lungs, engineering a death so quick the brain wouldn't have time to register pain. That wasn't luck. That was calculation. That was understanding wind drift, barometric pressure, Coriolis effect, the way cold air affected powder burn and velocity. That was mathematics transformed into violence. That was Watson Giles's signature. Scuderi had seen Giles work a dozen times, had watched him methodically dismantle enemy positions with the patience of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of an executioner. Giles didn't take wild shots, didn't spray and pray. Every round had purpose. Every target was chosen to create maximum disruption with minimum ammunition expenditure. "The angle's wrong," Martinez said, tracking the shot's origin with her own rifle. "That came from our 6 o'clock, high elevation. Captain, we don't have anyone there. That's not our people." "I know," Scuderi said, the words tasting like ash and impossible hope. The memory hit him like a physical blow, dragging him back 3 years to another storm, another mountain, another moment when Watson Giles had stood between his team and annihilation. They'd been compromised 12 hours into the operation. The intelligence had been wrong, or more likely, sold to the highest bidder. Instead of a soft target, they'd walked into a prepared defensive position manned by operators who moved with military precision, not local militia, not untrained insurgents. These were professionals, probably ex-special forces from half a dozen countries who'd found more profit in private work than patriotism. The extraction had turned into a running firefight through mountain passes that grew narrower and more treacherous with each kilometer. The blizzard had rolled in like a wall, visibility dropping to nothing, temperature plummeting until weapons started to freeze and men started making the kind of mistakes that got you killed. Giles had been on overwatch, positioned on a ridge with his AXMC rifle and enough ammunition to hold off an army, which was exactly what he'd proceeded to do. For 3 hours, that rifle had sung its deadly song, each shot buying the team another 100 meters, another minute, another breath. Scuderi remembered the radio call, remembered Giles's voice, calm and measured even as the situation deteriorated into a nightmare. "Captain, you need to move faster. They're flanking your position. We're moving as fast as we can. This terrain is going to get you all killed if you don't push harder. I can hold them, but you need to use the time I'm buying you." They'd pushed, through snow that reached their knees, across ice that threatened to send them tumbling into ravines, past the point where their bodies wanted to quit. Behind them, Giles's rifle kept talking, kept buying seconds with brass and lead. Then the ridge had collapsed. Not from enemy fire, from the weight of the snow itself, accumulated over weeks and destabilized by the vibrations of the firefight. Scuderi had watched it happen through the scope of his rifle, had seen the entire section of mountain simply give way, taking Giles's position with it in an avalanche of rock and ice that buried everything under thousands of tons of frozen geology. The radio had gone silent mid-transmission. "Holding at this position, you need to..." And then nothing, just static and the howling of the wind. They'd searched when the storm cleared, found the collapsed ridge, a fresh scar on the mountain face where rock and snow had swept away everything that had been there, found blood spray frozen in patterns that told stories of a last stand, found spent casings, brass still bright despite the weather, each one placed with precision even as death closed in. But no body, no weapon, no sign that Watson Giles had ever existed except the evidence of his final fight. MIA, presumed KIA. The designation that meant the military believed you were dead but couldn't prove it without remains. The classification that let them close the file, pay out the death benefits, and move on to the next operation. Scuderi had carried that weight ever since. The knowledge that he'd left a man behind, that Giles had sacrificed himself to buy time for a team to escape. Some nights, when sleep wouldn't come, he'd replay the operation in his mind, looking for the decision point where everything went wrong, the moment when a different call might have brought everyone home. "Captain," Cole's shout snapped Scuderi back to the present. "We've got movement. Eastern approach. Multiple contacts." The mercenaries had found their courage again, pushing through the tree line despite the sniper fire. Scuderi counted 8 figures spreading out in a tactical formation, using the limited cover of the marsh's edge. They were too far for effective engagement with rifles, but they were moving methodically toward the team's position. "Contact front," Martinez called, her rifle barking twice in quick succession. The rounds kicked up snow near the advancing enemies, forcing them to ground but not stopping them. Then Scuderi's radio crackled, not the modern encrypted frequency his team used. This was older, a 3-burst pattern that predated the current generation of tactical communications. The encryption protocol had been retired 18 months ago, replaced by more sophisticated systems that were supposedly unbreakable. 3 short bursts, 2 long, 1 short. It was a path marker, the same signal Giles had used to guide teams through contested terrain. Scuderi's hand moved to his GPS unit almost on instinct, and there it was, a route painted across his screen in real time, showing safe paths through the marsh, positions with natural cover, approaches that would keep them out of the enemy's direct fire lanes. "Cole, you seeing this?" Scuderi transmitted on the team frequency. "Affirmative, sir. That's the old Echo 7 protocol, but that was retired 18 months ago. I know." Scuderi studied the route. It wound through the marsh in a pattern that seemed random but would use every bit of available cover, every depression in the terrain, every frozen pool that was thick enough to cross safely. Whoever was sending this had perfect situational awareness of both the team's position and the enemy's approach vectors, which meant whoever was sending it had been watching this entire area for hours, maybe days. "Sir, we can't trust this," Martinez said, her voice tight. "It could be the enemy, trying to guide us into a kill zone." "The enemy doesn't need to trick us into a kill zone," Scuderi replied. "We're already in one." He made his decision in the space between heartbeats. "We follow the route. Move now, stay tight, and trust the guidance." They pushed forward into the marsh, following the path that appeared on their screens like a lifeline thrown by a ghost. The route took them through sections of terrain that looked impassable but held firm beneath their weight, around pools that appeared solid but would have swallowed them whole, across stretches of ice that groaned but didn't break. Behind them, the mercenaries continued their pursuit. Scuderi could hear them calling to each other, coordinating their advance. Professional, disciplined, the kind of enemy that didn't make mistakes, didn't panic, and didn't quit until the job was done. Then the sniper fire resumed. Not wild shots designed to suppress, but surgical strikes aimed at specific targets. Scuderi recognized the pattern immediately. Giles used to call it pruning the tree. You didn't shoot at the leaves, at the individual soldiers following orders. You cut away the branches, the squad leaders and fire team chiefs who coordinated the assault. You removed the pieces of the command structure one by one until the tree collapsed under its own disorganized weight. A shot cracked across the marsh. Through his rifle scope, Scuderi saw one of the mercenary squad leaders drop, the man who'd been directing the Eastern Elements movement. The formation faltered, troops looking to each other for orders that wouldn't come. Another shot. The radio operator on the western approach jerked backward, his communications equipment shattering in a spray of electronics and blood. The enemy force had just lost their ability to coordinate between elements. A third shot. The heavy weapons specialist who'd been setting up a position on the high ground, setting up to rain hell down on the Delta team, folded around a round that took him center mass. The PKM machine gun he'd been positioning clattered down the rocks, useless without the trained operator to wield it. 4 shots. The second squad leader, this one on the southern approach, trying to flank around the marsh to cut off the team's escape. He'd been moving tactically, using cover, staying low. The shot found him anyway, threading through a gap in the rocks that shouldn't have been large enough to matter. 4 targets, 4 kills, Cole said quietly, his voice carrying a note of awe and something else, something that might have been recognition. All in under 15 seconds, in blizzard conditions, from multiple angles, which means whoever's shooting is repositioning between shots. "Sir," Martinez said, and her voice had changed. Gone was the skepticism, replaced by the careful tone soldiers use when they're afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile and important. "I found brass, 50 BMG, custom load, still warm enough that snow's melting when it touches them." She held up a casing, and Scuderi didn't need to examine it to know what he'd find. He'd seen these rounds before, had watched them being hand-loaded with the obsessive precision of a master craftsman. Custom powder charges, calculated to maximize velocity at extreme range. Bullets seated at exact depths to optimize ballistic coefficient. Primer pockets uniformed to ensure consistent ignition. Watson Giles's preferred ammunition, loaded to his exact specifications. "It's not possible," Dr. Volkov said, looking between the operators with the incomprehension of a civilian trying to understand a reality that broke all the rules he thought he knew. One man? In this storm? Making these shots? The mathematics alone. "The mathematics is exactly the point," Scuderi interrupted. He was moving again, following the path on his GPS, trusting guidance from a dead man because the alternative was admitting that hope was a delusion. "There's only one person I ever knew who could do this kind of math in his head, in real time, under fire." "Captain," Cole said carefully, "Giles is dead. We searched for 5 days. The entire ridge collapsed. Even if he survived the avalanche, he couldn't have survived the exposure, the cold, not for 3 years alone in these mountains." "I know what the report says," Scuderi replied, scanning the ridgeline through the falling snow. "Somewhere up there, in the white hell that killed unprepared men in hours, someone was moving like a ghost. Someone was watching over them with the patience of a guardian angel and the lethality of divine judgment. Someone who shot like a dead man. Then who's saving our lives?" Martinez asked. Scuderi didn't have an answer. Not one that made sense. Not one that didn't sound like the desperate hope of a man who'd carried guilt for 3 years and would give anything for a chance at redemption. But as another shot rang out across the frozen marshland, as another enemy coordinator fell and the mercenary formation began to dissolve into confusion and panic, as the path marker on his GPS updated with new routes that would lead them towards safety, Scuderi allowed himself something he hadn't permitted in 1,000 days. He allowed himself to believe in ghosts. The cave mouth appeared on Scuderi's GPS like a promise, a narrow opening in the rock face, barely visible through the blizzard, situated at the base of a cliff that rose into the white void above. The path marker had led them here, through 2 hours of marsh and mountain that should have killed them a dozen times over, but hadn't, because someone was watching. "Defensive positions," Scuderi ordered as they approached. "Martinez, Cole, cover our 6. If this is a trap, I want us ready to fight our way out." But it wasn't a trap. The cave was exactly what it appeared to be, a shelter carved by wind and time into the mountain's face, deep enough to provide protection from the storm, high enough that a man could stand without stooping. And more than that, there were signs of habitation, a fire pit with ash still holding faint warmth, stacked ammunition crates serving as furniture, a sleeping area carved into the rock with precision that spoke of patient work over long months. Someone had been living here, not days, not weeks. The wear patterns, the organization, the way the space had been adapted to human survival. This was a home built over years. "Captain," Cole's voice was tight, "you need to see this." On the cave wall, scratched into the rock with the point of a knife, were hash marks, not random, organized in groups of 10, each group carefully aligned. Scuderi counted them twice, his throat tightening with each tally. 1,017 marks. 1,017 days. 3 years, minus the time it would take to reach this position from where the ridge had collapsed. 3 years of solitary survival in conditions that broke trained operators in weeks. 3 years of living like a ghost, sustained by nothing but will, and whatever purpose kept a man breathing when he should have surrendered to the cold. "Captain Scuderi." The voice came from the cave entrance, quiet and measured, carrying an accent that years of mountain wind had scraped rough but hadn't managed to erase. Scuderi spun, his rifle coming up, and there, materializing from the snow like a spirit given flesh, stood Watson Giles. Except this wasn't the man Scuderi remembered. That Giles had been lean but solid, an athlete's build maintained through military discipline. This version was harder, stripped down to essential elements. His face was weathered leather, beard grown long and shot through with gray that hadn't been there 3 years ago. His eyes held something that looked like the depths of the mountains themselves, ancient, patient, and absolutely certain. He wore a ghillie suit that seemed to be made from the mountain itself, pieced together from materials scavenged and adapted over years. In his hands, he cradled his AXMC rifle like a lover, the weapon maintained with obsessive care despite conditions that should have rendered it useless months ago. Giles. The name came out strangled, caught somewhere between question and prayer. Sir. Giles nodded, the gesture carrying echoes of the soldier he'd been. Good to see you're still breathing. I was starting to think I'd lost track of too many variables. You're dead, Martinez said, her rifle wavering between target acquisition and shock. We searched for you. We found. You found what I wanted you to find, Giles interrupted, his voice carrying no apology. Blood from the enemy I'd killed. My tags left where you'd see them. Spent brass arranged to suggest a last stand. I heard the search helicopters. Heard you calling my name. Stayed hidden because I needed you to stop looking. Why? The word came out raw, carrying 3 years of guilt and sleepless nights. Why let us think you were dead? Giles was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant, looking at something beyond the cave walls. Because I failed, he said finally. That operation went wrong because I missed variables I should have caught. People died because my calculations were incomplete. I thought if I came back, if I stayed in the system, I'd just fail again. But out here, he gestured to the mountains, to the storm, to the wilderness that should have killed him but hadn't. Out here, I could do the math right. No bureaucracy, no politics, just probability and physics, and making sure the right people survive. You've been living in these mountains for 3 years? Dr. Volkov asked, his scientific mind trying to process the impossible. Alone? In these conditions? Not living, Doctor. Existing. There's a difference. Giles moved into the cave with the fluid efficiency of a predator, every motion economical, no wasted energy. I move between positions, watch the valleys, intervene when the math says someone deserves a chance. You're not my first rescue. Probably won't be my last. He set his rifle down with reverence, then pulled out a worn notebook from his ghillie suit. The pages were covered in cramped handwriting calculations, wind tables, ballistic charts, all hand-drawn with the precision of a technical manual. 3 years of accumulated data, observation transformed into actionable intelligence. We have a problem, Giles said, opening the notebook to a page dense with numbers. The mercenary force pursuing you has a command element positioned on the frozen plateau, 3 kilometers northwest. They're coordinating the hunter-killer teams through a centralized communications array. As long as that command structure exists, they'll keep coming. Kill teams will keep spawning, and eventually, the numbers game catches up with you. So we avoid them, Cole suggested. Use the storm, lose them in the mountains. Can't. Giles traced a route on a hand-drawn map, one that showed terrain features with accuracy that matched military-grade topographical surveys. They've got thermals and they know you're heading for the extraction point here. He tapped a marked position. They'll be waiting. You'd walk straight into a crossfire with nowhere to run. Then we're trapped, Martinez said. No. Giles's finger moved to a different position on the map. Then we remove the command element. Cut off the head. The body dies. That's always been the math. Scuderi studied the map, calculating distances and angles. That plateau is 2,200 meters from here. In these wind conditions, with the storm, 2,214 meters, Giles corrected, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who'd measured every inch of these mountains in blood and brass. 43-knot winds with gusts to 55. Temperature -18 Celsius. Barometric pressure dropping, which affects bullet trajectory by. He consulted his notebook, fingers tracing down columns of hand-calculated data, 0.3 milliradians at this range. That's an impossible shot, Cole said flatly. Even for you? No. Giles looked up from his notebook, and his eyes held something that might have been humor, if humor could exist in a man who'd spent 3 years alone with his failures. It's an improbable shot. There's a difference. Impossible means the math doesn't work. Improbable means the math works, but the variables are unfavorable. I've been calculating these variables for 1,000 days. I know these mountains. I know how the wind moves through the valleys. I know where the thermal layers create instability and where they stabilize. He tapped the notebook. This isn't black magic, Captain. This is just physics carried to its logical conclusion. Even if you can make the shot, Dr. Volkov interjected. You said command element. That's multiple targets. You would need 6 rounds, Giles said. 3 primary targets, 3 secondary. The command officers who are making tactical decisions. The communications specialists maintaining coordination. The heavy weapons position providing overwatch. Remove those 6 elements in rapid succession, and the remaining forces lose cohesion. They'll fall back to regroup, which gives you the time you need to reach extraction. You're talking about 6 precision shots at over 2,000 meters, Scuderi said. In under what? 30 seconds? 28 seconds, assuming optimal conditions. 35 if the wind shifts. Giles was already moving, breaking down his firing position in the cave, preparing for movement. But I can't do it from here. The angle's wrong. I need elevation and a clear line of sight, which means I need to be on the ridge above the plateau. That ridge is exposed, Cole protested. They'll see you. No, they won't. Giles pulled the ghillie suit tighter, becoming something that was more mountain than man. They'll be looking at you. The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its execution. Scuderi's team would move to the edge of the mercenary perimeter, probe their defenses, make themselves visible enough to draw attention. The command element would focus on coordinating a response, would cluster around their communications equipment, would expose themselves for just long enough, and Watson Giles would be waiting with physics and patience, and a rifle that had been speaking the language of death for 3 years. The frozen plateau spread before them like an amphitheater designed by a sadistic god. Scuderi's team was positioned in a ravine at the southern edge, hidden but constrained, while the mercenary force held the high ground. Through his rifle scope, Scuderi could see the command position, a cluster of vehicles arranged in a defensive circle, antenna arrays reaching toward the sky, figures moving with the purpose of men directing a battle. Giles, you in position? Scuderi transmitted on the ancient frequency, half expecting static. Affirmative. The voice was distant, thin with altitude and cold. I have eyes on all primary targets. Stand by for wind calculation, adjusting for thermal gradient, recalculating for Coriolis at this latitude. The radio went silent except for the faint sound of breathing. Each exhale a ghost in the frozen air 2 kilometers away where Watson Giles lay on a ridge, becoming part of the mountain, transforming mathematics into destiny. Range, 2,214 meters. Wind, 43 knots, west-northwest. Angle of attack, minus 16 degrees. Probability of first-round impact. A pause, 67%. Probability of target neutralization across all 6 shots, 41%. Acceptable odds. Acceptable? Martinez muttered. He's calculating genocide with a calculator and calling it acceptable. He's calculating our survival, Scuderi corrected. All units, execute distraction protocol. Make them see you. Make them react. They moved as a unit, breaking from the ravine, advancing on the mercenary perimeter in a tactical formation that was aggressive enough to demand attention, but controlled enough to retreat when the response came. The effect was immediate shouts from the plateau, weapons tracking, the command element clustering around their communications equipment to coordinate the response. They're grouping, Giles's voice crackled. Command element is consolidating. I have all 6 targets identified. Request final authorization. Scuderi looked at his team, at the mercenary force that outnumbered them 5 to 1, at the mathematician on the mountain who had spent 3 years turning solitude into precision. He thought about impossible shots and acceptable odds, and the thin line between salvation and suicide. Authorization granted, he said. Send it. The first shot was thunder without warning. Through his scope, Scuderi saw the enemy commander, a tall figure who'd been gesturing at a map spread across a vehicle hood, suddenly crumple. The man's second-in-command turned, confusion morphing into shock, and then he too fell as the second shot found him 2 seconds later. The communications specialist was reaching for his radio when the third shot took him, the equipment shattering in a spray of electronics that killed the mercenary force's ability to coordinate. 3 shots in 7 seconds. 3 precision strikes at a range where most snipers couldn't reliably hit a stationary building, let alone moving human targets in high winds. The mercenaries were reacting now, scattering, searching for the threat. But Giles was already adjusting, already calculating the next series of impossibilities. The 4th shot took out the radio operator on the western perimeter, silencing another communications node. The 5th shot found the heavy weapons specialist who'd been setting up a mortar position, removing the enemy's ability to rain indirect fire on the Delta team's escape route. The 6th shot was pure surgical violence. A fuel bladder mounted on one of the command vehicles erupted in a fireball that turned the plateau orange. The explosion so massive it created its own wind patterns, flames reaching up to claw at the storm clouds. 6 shots, 11 seconds. An entire command structure decapitated by a man who'd spent 1,000 days alone in the mountains calculating the mathematics of survival. The mercenary force dissolved. Without leadership, without communications, facing an invisible threat that killed with precision they couldn't comprehend, the professional soldiers made the professional decision. They fell back, retreating into the storm, survival instinct overriding contract obligations. "Target neutralization complete," Giles transmitted, his voice carrying no satisfaction, no triumph. Just the flat certainty of a man who'd done complicated math and proven his calculations correct. "You have a 30-minute window to reach extraction. I recommend you use it." "Roger that." Scuderi signaled his team. "Giles, what's your exfil plan?" "Same as it's been for 3 years. I disappear." "Negative." Scuderi's voice carried the command authority of a captain who'd just been given back, something he'd thought lost forever. "You're coming with us." "That's an order." "Sir, I'm not military anymore. I don't exist. You can't order a ghost." "Then I'm asking, as the man who left you behind 3 years ago, as the man who's carried that weight every day since, come home, Giles. Stop punishing yourself for failures that weren't yours to own." The radio was silent for so long that Scuderi thought the connection had died. Then, finally, quiet words that might have been surrender, or might have been acceptance, or might have been both. "Extraction. Coordinates." The helicopter appeared out of the storm like a mechanical angel, its rotors beating the snow into a frenzy as it settled onto the frozen ground. Scuderi's team moved aboard quickly, professionals executing an extraction they'd done 100 times before. Dr. Volkov was loaded, secured, the objective completed despite everything the mountain and the mercenaries had thrown at them. But Scuderi waited at the door, scanning the tree line, looking for a ghost who'd promised to come but might still vanish. Then he was there. Watson Giles emerged from the storm carrying his rifle and nothing else. No pack, no supplies, just the weapon and the clothes he'd worn for 1,000 days. He moved like someone who'd forgotten how to be around other humans, approaching the helicopter with the wariness of a wild animal who'd learned that survival meant trusting nothing. "Sir." Giles stopped at the ramp, his eyes meeting Scuderi's. "I need to make one thing clear. I'm not coming back to the system. I'm not returning to regular duty. I've spent 3 years learning how to be useful without the bureaucracy, and I won't give that up." "What are you proposing?" "Black-level authorization." Giles's voice carried the certainty of a man who'd calculated every angle before speaking. "I remain off books. No official status, no records, no accountability except to you. I work the missions where the math says someone deserves a chance but nobody else can reach them. I'm the asset you call when the situation is impossible and you need someone willing to live in the mountains until the job is done." Scuderi should have said no, should have insisted on protocols and procedures and accountability, but he looked at the man who'd spent 3 years alone turning guilt into purpose, who'd just executed 6 impossible shots to save a team he could have ignored, who'd chosen to remain a ghost because he believed that's where he could do the most good. Black-level authorization requires approval from command, Scuderi said. Then I'll wait here until you get it. I've gotten good at waiting. Or, Scuderi extended his hand, you get on this bird, and we have that conversation somewhere that isn't freezing our asses off while mercenaries regroup. Giles looked at the hand, at the helicopter, at the team inside who were watching this moment with the intensity of men witnessing something they'd thought impossible. Then he took the hand, allowed himself to be pulled aboard, became something more than a ghost. As the helicopter lifted off, climbing through the storm toward clearer skies, Scuderi watched Giles settle into a corner of the cargo bay. The sniper was already pulling out his notebook, already making new calculations, already preparing for whatever mission came next. "Welcome back," Scuderi said. Giles looked up, and for the first time in 3 years, something that might have been a smile crossed his weathered face. "Sir, with respect, I never left. I just learned how to do the math from a different angle." The helicopter banked toward extraction, carrying a team that had survived the impossible, a scientist who would live to defect, and a ghost who had chosen finally to be seen. Below them, the mountains held their secrets, and somewhere in those frozen peaks, a cave waited with 1,017 marks on the wall, a testament to what a man could endure when he believed his failure could be transformed into purpose. Watson Giles had spent 3 years becoming a legend the military would never officially acknowledge. He'd calculated survival where mathematics said only death was possible. He'd become something more efficient and more deadly than any program could train, any authorization could command. He'd become the asset you called when the mission was impossible and the math said everyone should die. And now he was coming home, on his own terms, to do the kind of work that existed only in the shadows and the spaces between official reports. A ghost who chose when to be seen, a marksman who turned physics into salvation. Authorization, black,